is a great location to recap some of Jesus' movements in those last hours of his earthly life. Of course, behind us we can see the eastern gate of the Golden Dome, which in my view is probably located right on the site of the Second Temple. You may notice that the eastern gate does not line up with it. Did you notice that? And so that has led some scholars to an alternate view, and if, Lord willing, we get on top of the mount, we'll perhaps point that out to you. But I still think that the Golden Dome is right over the, at least the Holy of Holies. Well, on that last evening, remember that Jesus celebrates this supper. It's in the context and setting of a Passover supper, and I think that it was a Passover that Jesus celebrated with his disciples. Remember the model we saw over in West Jerusalem? We looked down on that model, and Pamela was pointing out the very nice homes up on the upper city, what is today called Mount Zion, and that in one of those rooms there was the Last Supper. So if you can visualize that, Jesus is going to make his way from that area, way off here, 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, and now this is debated, because it was during a Passover, I think the temple was still open at night. I think he made a shortcut across the Temple Mount. If he did so, he would have seen, and the disciples would have seen once again, that beautiful golden grapevine on the facade of the temple. And as he is moving toward this place, we have John 15. And what does he talk about in John 15? I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he trims clean so that it will be even more fruitful. In other words, on the way over here, he's still teaching. And as he passes by, and of course everybody admired that beautiful golden vine, here's an opportunity, a teachable moment, and he says, I am that true vine. You want to be plugged into me, and you will have that sap and that spiritual nourishment. So he comes here to this place, and in John's Gospel, when he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples. All right, we're back up there in the upper room. He crossed, he crossed the Kidron Valley, right behind us, right in the bottom there. On the other side, there was an olive grove. And he and his disciples went into it. Now, I'm going to read between the lines rather generously here. I'm wondering, this was a place, according to the Gospels, that Jesus frequented often. It was a, let's call it a hideout, a safe house. And Jesus brought them here so that they can be away from the prying eyes and the hostile eyes of the religious authorities who up there are trying to seize Jesus, arrest him. They have a problem. Jesus is immensely popular. People throng around him. When he's up there, if the police intervene, we're going to have a riot. So they're looking for an occasion to nab him when he's away from the crowds, you see. And where does he spend the night most nights?
Bethany.
Okay, and also on the back side at Bethany. So there's two safe houses, as it were. This one is kind of cool because it's right under the nose of the temple authorities, but they have no idea where he is. He can be right here, they're up there, but they don't know where he's at. How did he first get to know this place and choose this place? I don't know. Now I'm going to speculate wildly. Jesus' parents came regularly to attend the festivals. We know that from the Gospels. And when Jesus was 12, he made a visit here. Remember that remarkable visit? He stayed behind and quizzed the religious authorities, gave them a final exam. which they failed, I think. But be that as it may, I think that Jesus' parents already had some connections, that Jesus knew this from his childhood. Over here at the Church of St. Anne, we have a place that commemorates Joachim and Anne, or Anna, Mary's parents. Well, see, there's all these little links and connections that we're not explicitly told, but I think there's a story behind the story. This place was well known, and that is the place to which he brings the disciples on this occasion. And this, of course, is becoming the crisis. Now I'm going to go to Matthew's version and read just a section here from his gospel. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee. Those boys are James and John. He took the two sons of Zebedee along with him. They are the inner circle, Peter, James, and John. He began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me." You know, in the biblical imagery of the Old Testament, a cup can be a source of great blessing or a source of poison and bitterness. And it just depends on the context. And here we have, it's pretty hard to describe this cup, because it is going to be, on the one hand, wormwood, if you like, bitterness, but it also is going to issue in sweet wine of salvation. So this is a cup that just fraught with all kinds of significance. "May this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Think about that. This is one of those crisis points in life. Not what I want, but what you want. Jesus had to come to that point in his life as well. There is much that I will never be able to enter into the spiritual, emotional thought processes of Jesus as he comes to this moment. In his heart and mind, he knows that he is the anointed Redeemer. This must be done, but the prospect of experiencing this wrath of God, this judgment, this separation that will happen when he becomes the sin bearer, is more than he can. It's extremely difficult. I can't even imagine how difficult this would be. Well, in a much less traumatic and important way, each one of us, and if we had time, we could go around in this group, each one of us has come to a "not my will, but your will be done" moment, right? Mm-hmm. We've come there. And we know we're going to have some more. And because I've told you this a few times, we've been around the block a few times, we know that there's one of these moments that is out there, and we are moving ever closer to it. We're going to come to that final point where it's not my will, but it's your will. And we're going to have to just commit ourselves, because he is our only resource. Mm-hmm. And he is the one who will see us through the dark valley and meet us on the other side. In fact, he never leaves us. It's not like Pam here. She's going to leave us. We're going to go over to Bethlehem, but the Lord's going to go right through, and we'll be right with him. The Lord is my shepherd, and he will go walk through the valley with us. So as we contemplate our own moments and our own valley of decision, as it were, we need to come back to Gethsemane. We need to just revisit this place and then put into practice what the Master has set for an example. You know, Peter says that we are to walk as he walked. We walk in his steps, literally. And I'm reminded that Peter also said, the Lord also explicitly tells these folks to pray and beware. You know, the temptations are going to come. watch and pray. And that was probably directed right at Peter.
Yeah.
His moment of crisis is looming because Judas is already on the way. Judas has tipped off the authorities. He tells them where the hideout is. And of course, Jesus already knows this. So he has some time to prepare them, and he asks them to watch and to pray. Peter is going to have a meltdown. He's going to fail in his hour of trial. But years later, he remembers this story. It never really left his consciousness and mind. And as he writes to believers who are in what is today modern Turkey, he just reminds them of some things that, a lesson he had to learn the hard way, where he tells these folks, be self-controlled and alert. Mm-hmm. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that your brothers throughout the world are undergoing the same kind of sufferings. And so an exhortation from a good brother who's been there, done that, had a blowout, a meltdown, but he came back. And he then was able to finally say, not my will, but yours be done. The tradition, of course, has Peter going to his death in Rome, and because he felt so unworthy, because he felt he had let the Lord down, he requested to be crucified upside down. Mm-hmm. Wow. A real moment of commitment there. But at any rate, at the end, he was faithful. Faithful unto the end. Have you heard me say this before? Finish strong. Mm-hmm. Okay? That's the mission. And Gethsemane is the place where we can do that. Not my will, but yours be done. May the Lord. Of King David. And this is after his big meltdown and his failure. Remember the Bathsheba affair and what came out of that. Tragedy struck the house of David. After David, okay, let me expand on this story just a moment. For those who went to Jordan, we'll also call this the Ammon affair, because over in Ammon, David had dispatched his troop. There was a war between Israel and Ammon, and Joab had led the forces over there, and David was still in town, and he fell into this affair with Bathsheba. Out of that came a son. But before that happened, Nathan the prophet showed up. The prophets in the Old Testament are a kind of special prosecutor. And Nathan comes in, and this is a very delicate operation. It's pretty risky to take on a king straight on. So he comes in with a very clever little ploy. He appears as an advocate and bringing a cause to be judged by the king. Kings are the supreme court in ancient theocracies and monarchies. And so David is the supreme court, and he would sometimes decide cases that have been appealed up to him. Solomon, on one occasion in the Bible, renders a very famous verdict. You may recall there was a dispute over child custody. Well, Nathan comes with a case, namely that there's a certain man, and he had a little flock of sheep, and he had this special little pet. For those of us in North American culture, we probably haven't seriously considered having a little sheep as a pet. Maybe. I grew up on a ranch where we actually had little sheep as pets, but most of us have cats and dogs, right? My story is getting convoluted, but I will come back to my point. In the Middle East, dogs are rarely, if ever, viewed in a positive light. Now, if they are, it's because they're westernized. But traditional Middle Eastern culture, a dog is kind of a scavenger and an obnoxious kind of beast. Well, this man had this little pet lamb. And a wealthy man next door had a guest, and rather than take from his own flock, which was large, he took this guy's little pet lamb and barbecued it. So Nathan comes to David with this story, and David is just he comes off his throne and says, man deserves to die, but of course that would be extreme. Okay, what does the law require? According to Exodus, it's 1 for 4. All right? He should restore 4 for the one that he took. And Nathan says, fair enough, you have judged so. So it shall be. You are the man. You are the man. You stole another man's wife, and then you murdered, you arranged the assassination, the death in battle, I should say, of this Uriah the Hittite. Do you folks realize that David did pay 4 little lambs? His son by Bathsheba died. Amnon, his eldest, was killed by his brother Absalom. Absalom revolted against him and was killed in battle. And the last one, whose name is suddenly, I'm having a senior moment, it was Adonijah. 4 little lambs that he had to pay. What a price. Terrible price. The last years of David are not his stellar years, that's for sure. In his family, things begin to fall apart. And on that occasion when son number 3, Absalom, over here in Hebron, has led an army to Jerusalem to topple his dad from power. And David has no option but to flee the city. He comes and crosses the Kidron and starts making his way up the slopes of the Mount of Olives. And it says, as he does so, he was weeping, realizing the tragedy, the consequences of sin beginning to descend upon him. And his family barely gets across. They flee into the desert. We came up that road. They went down that road. They crossed the Jordan and got over on the other side and escaped Absalom's men. But as David is climbing the Mount of Olives this direction and weeping, there is another moment. Now fast forward your VCR, your video. Fast forward. Now we're with Jesus and the disciples on the last week. He's coming up from Jericho, right? Climbing up. And he crests over the top of the Mount of Olives and he gets a view of the city. And it's Dr. Luke who tells us, but you would know it from memory, when he looked out over the city, what did he do? He wept. He could see the consequences of disobedience, the failure to recognize this is the appointed hour. How tragic, how sad. And I guess it always strikes me that there's a kind of typology here. 2 kings going in opposite directions, and this moment of intersection, a divine moment, as it were, in which both weep. Consequences of brokenness, rebellion, and of sin. But King David goes away in disgrace. The new king is coming with grace and truth, and he is going to fulfill his destiny, the appointed destiny, the one that before the foundation of the world was set for him. He's going to be the Lamb who takes away the sin of the world. Coming down the slopes, well, Dr. Luke says it very nicely. As he begins this journey, it says he set his face to go to Jerusalem. He kind of, here's the idiom we might use, grit your teeth, because he is going to do this at all costs. The Savior has committed himself to rescuing his people, and that he did.